Welcome to the Searchlight Sessions. My name is Maggie McClure and I am your host. Today I am really excited to bring to you guys special guests Patrick Conlon and Christina Giacona from Onyx Lane. Hi guys.
Hello.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Yes, of course. So Patrick and Christina are musicians, composers, producers, and they have been successfully composing and arranging and producing music for film, sound installations, live performances, and albums for over a decade together. That is so awesome. We're honored to have you guys on the video today, and we'd just like to start by asking you both your background in music and how you got started. Whoever wants to go first.
You want to?
Yeah, so my family is loosely musically inclined. My dad was a songwriter and he was in the film industry. And so I started composing my own little songs when I was 4 years old. I started playing recorder when I was in 5th grade, and everybody was so confused why I was playing so many notes and had great breath control. So I actually got into band in 6th grade, and I played clarinet. And so I have now many degrees in clarinet performance, but I was always intrigued by the composing and the recording side. So I kind of did those two things simultaneously. And now I'm obviously a producer and a performing clarinetist, but I'm also a music educator, and I teach at the University of Oklahoma.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I'm Patrick Conlon, kind of similar story. I mean, my earliest memory is sitting on my granddad's lap, pecking away at the piano. And so I think kind of similar thing, around like 4 or 5, I would just start writing little things on piano. And then I started violin when I was 7, and I started doing Atlantic style fiddle. So I'm originally from Ottawa, Canada. And so started doing kind of that Northeast Atlantic style fiddling. And so there's a lot of improvisation with that. And so for me, composing kind of came out of improvisation. And so I was doing that, and then, through middle school, I was writing these kind of little MIDI, creations for friends of mine who were making these little 16-bit video games and recording birthday songs for friends. And so then kind of did the full orchestra thing in high school, did all the all-state Oklahoma Youth Orchestra, all of that stuff, the classical side, and simultaneously was in a little band called the Bourgeoisie, and we do these little house shows in Norman. And kind of in retrospect, you go like, we were getting like 60 to 100 people at these shows on like a monthly basis, which is like actually pretty good. When you're in high school, you have no idea.
Yeah. Wow. Awesome.
Yeah, and so then went to college, did the classical college route, but when I was finishing up my undergrad, I met Christina, and she kind of came up, and so she had just finished doing a bunch of auditions for like Pittsburgh New Music Ensemble and a bunch of big groups like that, and said, she kind of busted into my practice room and was like, hey, I need you to help me study for, someone told me help study for string work, for the string generals that you had coming up, and do you want to join the Los Angeles New Music Ensemble? We're doing auditions out in LA and we need a violinist. And I was like, yes, absolutely. And so through that, we did a bunch of collaborations with people, and then when I graduated, I kept getting work as an engineer because I had my master's degree and I could teach theory and all of that side, but then I also had the engineering background of just doing recordings together and working on stuff. And then kind of we ended up here, and it's sort of the come full circle where all the stuff that, we sort of started out being this sort of new music, classical, collaborative thing, and then veered into the commercial side, and then started getting work kind of pairing the two together the last few years. So that's been really exciting.
That's awesome. So when did Onyx Lane officially become what it is today?
So we've been working together for 11 years, 12 years. I guess officially, we should probably say our first self-released album was in 2012, and we did Onyx Lane Records, even though technically it wasn't a record label, but since we did the majority of the work, we thought it fit. Our LLC is only a few years old, but it's more like we just decided to make it official and separate for tax purposes, mostly. But yeah, I would say probably 2012, right?
Yeah, probably 2012. We had a couple of bands. New music ensembles are just bands, and then we had a couple of like actual bands, and then it's sort of become the housing place for all of our projects. So rather than having everything separated into these little like, this is this band and this is this project and this is this, it's just kind of the umbrella musical corporation, I guess.
Very cool. And for those watching, I just want to clarify, you guys are based in Oklahoma, correct?
Yeah, we are based in Oklahoma City. Originally, my plan was to move back home. I'm from Los Angeles and work there exclusively, but Oklahoma was this amazing gem where we actually had the opportunity to get in on the ground level and start these collaborations and start working with really talented people here. Rather than moving back, we essentially just would travel back and forth, and now we pretty much are primarily here in just Oklahoma. Well, obviously, once travel is safer, we often do work in New York and Los Angeles, once a month maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, it's been really nice. It's kind of like we were kind of joking that each year there's something that, you know, we've both got full-time university positions, we've got these great relationships with, you know, like the Civic Center and all the big arts organizations, Castle Row Studios. And then each year we're like, okay, well, you know, there's not that much of this particular thing, like, say, full orchestral, you know, recording happening. Even though that's something we do, it's like, well, that's not here. And then we get asked by the Oklahoma City Philharmonic to do their first professional recording in 25 years since the bombing memorial one. And then it's just kind of this thing of, like, every year there's a new piece of the puzzle of what we used to have to go to LA or New York to get the gigs is happening right here. So
that's really awesome to hear. And it's great to have you guys here. Having lived in Los Angeles, I can totally relate to what you're saying. And there are so many opportunities in Oklahoma. It's really exciting to be here right now and be a part of what's going on right now. And I think for those wanting to get into the business, right now is a perfect time to get involved. So very exciting times for sure. So take us through, what does your life look like on a daily basis? Are you guys working on the same types of things, different things? Are you going into studios like you mentioned? Just give us a walkthrough. What are the different things you guys are working on?
So we actually have very interesting lives because each day is different depending on the project we're working on. It keeps us young. It keeps me with potentially more wrinkles, though.
It keeps us young, makes us feel old.
So we are composers and arrangers. We are performers. We are music producers and engineers. I'm a clarinetist. I'm also an ethnomusicologist. Patrick's a violinist. He's also works in music administration. And so typically, let's say for a week, we are probably in the studio twice a week, I would say.
Yeah, recording, and then we've got our mixing studio here that we're usually working on the rest of the time.
Yeah, so what would happen is actually today is a very exciting day. We are getting a bunch of cues for a feature film that we are going to be doing the orchestrations for. I'm going to be conducting the sessions. Patrick's going to be concert master. So essentially we have this weird amalgamation of composing, recording, playing, pretty much every week. And then interspersed with that, depending on our teaching schedules, I teach 2 classes a week that I will go in person for, but that's probably only about 5 hours of my week, I would say, is the actual in-person teaching.
Yeah, it's an interesting, so the way we brand the business is that we do artistic planning, and it's a full service music production company. So basically we can do it from, like, you know, farm to table, you know, like from the beginning of the planning stages through all the composition, through the production, we even do like mixing and mastering at the end. So when we're bidding on a project, we're usually bidding on what's left. So it's like what hasn't already been filled by people. And so, for example, this film that Christina's talking about, there's already a great composer attached to it, and it's being done at Castle Row, so a lot of the engineering aspect is taken already. And so we're the arrangers and the contractors. And so we're in charge of hiring all the musicians for it, handling the budget, but we're also doing the orchestration and putting together all the parts for it. And so that's why it's so different each day, because it depends like which part. a lot of times people will only kind of like focus on one aspect of this, and so for us it's kind of on that project, what is our role at that time? Because I mean, we just finished doing a completely different project. So there was the St. Luke's Church did a big orchestral kind of Christmas celebration, and since it was going to be such a big part of it, they hired us to mix it. And so we weren't the engineers on it, we just got the files and then we did the mixing and mastering for them. And so that's kind of a whole different portion of it that we're not doing on the film because that's already handled.
Yeah. Well, that's so awesome. Congratulations on the new film. That's really exciting. And I mean, obviously you guys are talented in so many different areas. How important do you feel like it is to have so many different skill sets being in the music and entertainment business?
Yeah, so one of the things that's kind of become one of the best skill sets that we have is because we've done each of the roles professionally, we know what those people need in terms of deliverables and the experience for them. And so since we're both session players, when we're producing session players, we know what they need from us in order to get the good take. And then since we, I mean, the best thing for us for learning how to mix was actually mastering some stuff, because once you start being a mastering engineer, you learn like exactly what a mixing engineer can send you that will give you more flexibility to change things or less. And so for us, that's really the being able to bid on projects, and then also that means that whenever we go back and do our own creative art, we've got those skill sets that we've got to learn with all these people. And so just being kind of a lifelong learner.
Yeah, we're lifelong learners for sure, and I would think it's very important actually to be able to do multiple things. Not that you necessarily will be doing all of those things on the same project, but it's easier to collaborate with those who are doing those other roles.
Like there's the big 2020 word people keep using is pivot, right? And luckily for us, we never actually had to pivot. We just kind of leaned into different parts of our career.
Is that not pivoting?
It's kind of pivoting. But I felt like we didn't have to do like an abrupt turn, you know? Because I mean, I'm sure you're the same way. I mean, we were doing, since we were each 10, we've probably done somewhere between 40 and 80 concerts a year. You know, like I've always had every weekend there's a concert. And so suddenly having those weekends free, we were able to lean into kind of like our own creative compositions and really doing, because before we were sort of evenly split between, you know, our teaching jobs and our production work and our composing and the performing. And then as soon as performing kind of stopped taking up that space, it instantly got filled by the other work, which was really great for us.
That's awesome. And yeah, I can completely relate to that as well. And I think this year has certainly been an opportunity. Obviously, it's been a challenge, but I think for those like yourselves who see it as an opportunity to focus more on other areas, it's really smart, and you guys are doing some really great things, and it's awesome to see everything that you're doing, and very encouraging as well. So I have to ask you guys, what exactly is a sound installation, and how would music be used with that?
So a sound installation really is your experience through the medium of art that includes music. And so what's actually really interesting with like artistic museum type experiences is that we are one element of the performance or the experience, but it's really us collaborating with a curator who has an overall vision that is essentially what she wants the audience. We just happened to work with a female curator recently, what she wanted the audience members to experience. So for us, it was previously recorded music that went along with dance videos and kiddos video pieces.
Yeah, so there was, so what we did, it's a 41 minute, basically it became an album. And that was because when COVID happened, it was one of those things that was supposed to open in April, and it was going to be like 20 minutes long, and we were going to get done over spring break. And we were actually, we were the music directors for Oklahoma Contemporary's grand opening. And so we did the Wednesday donor dinner, And then Thursday was the Thunder game, and everything got shut down. Their grand opening was supposed to be on Friday. Like,
I remember that.
right? So basically, we, sort of sat around in shock for spring break, and then went, okay, so the Cube of Light is what the name of the installation is, got kicked back to August. That's when we were like, okay, we're going to do it, in August for the opening. And so then we really started diving into it, and then it became 30 minutes long, and then it became 40 minutes long, and then we went, okay, we've got an album. And then we went, how can we make this interesting to people who are coming in? And how can we kind of both get to collaborate with people who are in the area and also get some jobs for everybody who are our friends, who are kind of like, all the performances just stopped. And so we contacted Hichapuz, who's curator and the creator of Race Dance Collective, and said, hey, we're looking at writing a grant to get some money for dance videos that will go along with this music. And then we got the grant money for that from OVAC, the Oklahoma Visual Arts Coalition, and that kind of spearheaded to then we went, okay, we want to do a dance video for each of these. And so we kind of had the video team, and then each track went with a different choreographer's video. And so now it's basically, we were like, it's the high art thing of Ragnar Kajansen has this wonderful piece that's been going around called The Visitors, which is basically an hour-long music video that's projected on different screens and has a mono mic that's kind of like playing whatever that visual shot is. And it's like this beautiful piece of art. We were like, we want to do something that's like half that and half Beyonce's Lemonade, where it's like a visual album. And so
That's awesome.
yeah, that's kind of what it became.
So the idea of an installation is that you're experiencing this art in a very specific location. And the thing is, when, installations move locations, you actually will experience the art, even the same art, completely differently because the location you are in is different. What made this piece, actually, it turned out better than I think we ever would have imagined, is the fact that we can't get 30 people in the same space at the same time. It was a fairly small gallery. And so we wanted to create an installation that could be remote, it could be online, it could be in person, and it could stand alone as its own, album of music. And so that was really kind of our idea behind this installation, this creation. So it has a life outside of the actual installation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is so cool. A lot of people think about collaborating with other musicians. Musicians think about collaborating with other musicians. What would you say to fellow musicians about collaborating with other facets of the arts like you guys have done here? What advice would you give?
I think if you want to do it, I think you should absolutely do it. So yes, of course, musicians coming together and making music is not unusual. Even different artistic genres, dance, paired with music is not necessarily that, far-fetched. We've all experienced those things together. I think you will find creating art through a different artistic lens to be one of the most rewarding things you can do. Do you want to collaborate on just some of those positive things that happen through our experience?
Yeah, I mean, it's the thing that's, as an artist, right, you want people to react to your work. And so there's very little that's more special than seeing another artist react to your work with art. And so that was what was so cool. And one of the things about the Cube of Light was it was a really trusting collaboration with everyone. On the music side, we had collaborations as well. Dustin Ragland did drums, and we sent it to him and went, hey, see what you can find. This part's in 7/4, this is a multimeter part. Like, it's a pretty heady piece.
And then Mitch Bell.
And Mitch Bell did guitar on it, and so it was really a thing where, with the choreographers, everyone's a professional, right? So we've all dealt with clients, so they were all very professional about, what's your vision? I don't want to step on any toes. And we were like, this is your part. Here's the music. We've got the film covered, and Josh Bivens was our director for it. He was incredible. And it's like, we're going to provide that, and then you just take it from there. And so
that's cool, because wouldn't you agree, a lot of the time when you're given an opportunity, you have a lot of limitations. You have a lot of guidelines. People tell you exactly what they're wanting. So how freeing and awesome to get an opportunity to literally have a blank canvas to do whatever you want. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That was one of our things with writing it.
Right.
Was we were like, you know, it's a weird album. I mean, like, some of them are songs and some of them are just straight up kind of like symphonic 5-minute instrumental pieces. And we were like, we don't want to, like, we were like, we're making this one for us. I mean, we help other people fulfill their artistic visions all the time, and we love that. But this one was like, we don't want to limit it to what we think people would want to listen to.
Yeah, we did not hold back. We wrote some weird music, and everybody, every time we think something's really weird, right? Somebody's like, I love that part. It was so unusual. And you're like, yes.
That's awesome.
So we also wanted everyone else to get that feeling too. Because, you know, we were all like in the middle of like depressing COVID artist land, you know, and so we were like, we want you to just get to make some art. You know, it's like, and so it worked out great.
And I think one of the things that was really actually important for us is these videos are going to go out into the world and people are going to see them all around the world. But we also wanted to showcase how talented Oklahoma City artists are. And so everything, I don't think there's anything outside of it that's not Oklahoma made. Mm-hmm. Like we specifically chose locations that were iconic to Oklahoma City. Mm-hmm. I mean,
yeah, we did a scoring orchestra that was as, you know, big as we could safely do with the COVID restrictions. And it was cool because, I mean, we did it on a fairly, I mean, like, we didn't cheap out on anything, but because we knew everybody, everyone got paid who did their work. But one of our big reference tracks was Daft Punk's Random Access Memories. And it sounds very like that at certain times, like full orchestration and like the improvisation and, you know, the drums and the synthesizers. Mm-hmm. But that album cost $1 million to make. And ours was done, and, you know, it was made on like 3 or 4 different continents, and they kept having to fly around. We were like, we made this in Oklahoma City with Oklahoma City people, and it was really special.
Yeah, I think we only spent $15,000.
Yeah, I think it was maybe with everything. You know, dance videos, yes. The whole thing.
Maybe 16. We extra $1,000 for the mastering.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's awesome. And yes, there is so much talent right here in Oklahoma. It's amazing, and that's so cool that you guys were able to showcase that, and also the locations. I think that's another really important part to talk about as well. A lot of people don't realize all the amazing locations that are at our fingertips here in Oklahoma, whether it's filming for movies or music videos or art installations or, you know, anything. There's a lot of opportunities and some great talent and locations we've got here in Oklahoma. I wanted to jump to another topic with you guys. So let's talk about, you probably have come across some musicians or artists that maybe don't have a traditional classical composition background, but they think, I could probably compose. Okay, what do you think are some key differences between producers and composers if you come from not a classical background, and what are the different skill sets that you need for both of those things, and where do the lines kind of blur?
Mm-hmm. Do you want to talk about composing?
Sure. So, and this is kind of our generation, so we always grew up doing both, right? So it's like we were in bands and we were in orchestra, and we grew up seeing that for older generations there was a big both like job divide and cultural divide. You know, it's like if you're a classical musician, you're a classical musician, and if you're a producer, you're a producer. And I don't think for our generation growing up in North America it was like that. I mean, like, we were constantly, you know, it's like Simon and Garfunkel for me is on the same stage as Brahms and is on the same stage as, you know, any, you know, Daft Punk, and all of these artists are like, they're all people making music, and that's how I experienced it. So with composition, I just view it as one tool set. And so a lot of times people will say like, oh, I don't know how to read notation. right? If they don't know how to read like classic Western European, 5-bar staves.
But they're reading notation all the time.
Right. Piano score, like piano rolls is a form of notation. Like reading a DAW and seeing it against the timeline is a form of notation. And so one of the big things that we both try and do is to kind of unpack sort of some of the post-colonial like Eurocentrisms that are around those things, of saying like, this is like high art and this isn't. And a lot of times it's really like there's some gross like cultural background that's with that. And so for us, just trying to really simplify it and say like, these are different notations. No one is equally versed in all of them. So you kind of look at what are the things that you're already comfortable with, and as a musician you've gotten as skill sets. And then how can you use those, and then what are the spots where if you want to write music that's in a specific style, maybe there are some elements of the process that you need to learn to get that to happen.
I would say creativity is creativity, however you get that on the page or in the DAW or on the movie score, however it is. So as you know, a lot of movie and media composers do not actually read Western notation. And so the role of the orchestrator actually came out of just having somebody all it is a translation, translating the sound into something visual. And so I say, if you're hearing it, you're a composer. You are.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's very cool. And I've had a little experience with that. And this year, well, in 2021, hope to be able to compose our first film, which I'm really excited about.
Awesome.
So we've done a lot of featured songs, but as far as instrumental pieces, score, if you will, this will be our first one to do. So we're really excited about that. And I'm encouraged to hear you guys say that, because I've heard a lot of people say, well, you really need to have this specific skill set. But I agree. It really all does come down to the creativity. And yes, you do have to have a certain amount of skills in these areas. And but I can speak, coming from a classical background, going to OCU, but also being very contemporary outside of school. I write chord charts for my band members. A lot of them don't know how to read music. But that doesn't mean they're any less creative than someone who does read music. So yeah, that's really encouraging to hear you guys say that. And I would encourage everyone watching today to know, if you're creative and you have the want to do it, there is a way and you should just do it. So that's awesome.
Well, and one of the things that you said right there, and what we've really learned as producers, is different processes of notation yield different musical results. So it's like, if so say for like an electric bass player, so if we want something super specific, we can get someone and write out specifically the notes and the rhythms, and we want this articulation, and we want this dynamic, but then you're going to lose out on what they might be able to bring as their unique style. And so that's when you go like, if that's the sound I want, if I want exactly this, then we've got that ability. But if you want more of a groove, then one of the things Christina's so good at is choosing the right musician to fill that part. And so a lot of times as session musicians, you're hiring someone because you want their sound. You go like, I want what you will do if I just give you a chord chart to happen on this. And I can't make you do that with traditional notation. Like, the way we get to that result is by having that. And so, especially with film scoring, when you're trying to write in so many different styles, having different processes that yield different musical results, I think is a really important part. Like, I know, for me, if I start on piano writing a piece, I tend to think much more harmonically, right? Like, I'm thinking about chords. But if I'm starting through a DAW, I might be thinking much more about soundscapes and about synthesizers. Or if I'm on violin, I'm thinking about melodies and counterpoint and looping and things like that. So I think just taking away the kind of like, ooh la la, this is true notation and this isn't, and being like, if you want the Nashville sound from a session player, you shouldn't show up with like sheet music. You should just hire a Nashville session player and have them give them the chord chart and go with it, you know.
Yeah, that's awesome. I wanted to ask you guys, what advice would you give to people who would like to start getting into this business, and if their goal is to be a film composer and do some of the things that you guys do, what advice would you give them? Would you say networking is a big part of it? Education? Feel free to elaborate.
Sure, yeah. If you're wanting to become especially like a film composer or scoring for commercials, you really just have to do it. Now, so obviously networking is an important aspect to meeting people, but before you can get hired for your first gig, you have to have some kind of portfolio that shows you can and you should get hired for a specific gig. So when we were younger, we just created opportunities for ourselves. We never said, oh, I didn't have the opportunity to score something. You know somebody who has an iPhone and can make a 3-minute video of them roller skating, let's say, right? Score that. Patrick also just had many students go through the 48-hour film festival.
Oh yeah, like things like that where it's like they're opportunities to work on passion projects with other people. So, and I view that as very different than offering your services for free versus finding opportunities to make art with people where money's not the issue. And so, I mean, you think about it, and it just gets harder as you get older, but like when you're young, you don't think about the fact that like how many orchestra concerts did we play for free from 5th grade through college, and how many times did we get a chance to like, when we were playing with our band, we weren't charging admission to our basement concerts, you know, and so you want to get those hours in so that when you get the gig, you're already somewhat experienced. Mm-hmm. And what Christina said about creating our own opportunities, that was a big thing for us. And so if we don't have a gig lined up, we'll just work on our music. And then you get better at it through that. So it's like most of our stuff that we're working on, you know, for our own personal stuff have big kind of orchestral parts. And so we're recording and working on that, which means when you get the next gig, you're still getting better. You're still like building those skills.
I think it's important to know, and this is with any industry, but specifically with entertainment, you're going to get gigs from people you already know. So our website and our, you know, social media or whatever are proof of what we do. And so a lot of times somebody will ask somebody we know, says, oh, we need a composer for this project. That person says, oh, check out their website. So it's still, you know, it's like one step removed from a direct, you know, contact. And so by collaborating with people now, you're starting to build essentially, you know, your roster of collaborators, of future collaborators.
Yeah, it's kind of that thing of like all network is like, in order to be successful, you need to have something to offer, like some sort of skill set that, because otherwise people would do it themselves, right? So it's like you need something that's a special skill set that's hard to do that you get good at, and you need people to know that you can do that thing. And so a lot of times people will approach networking with the idea of like, I need gigs, and it's like that's not something to offer, you know, like that's you want gigs, but it's like, oh, everyone wants gigs. But if you approach it with like, this is what I have to offer people, and I want to be able to give that experience, that's when because you're making art, there's the business side, everyone has to get paid, but there's also the art side of like, you want to make great art with people and have it be successful and have that experience with people.
I'm blanking on the name, but he was a composer, but he essentially worked in an art collective, Scandinavian.
Oh, so like Johan Johansson, he got, you know, big Hollywood composer, you know, very tragic death recently, but he got big because he had this artist collective in Iceland for like 10 years, releasing experimental albums and doing art shows and collaborations, until he had done enough stuff that people went, we want that on a film. And then he became a film composer. But there's that whole backlog of like all of the years of doing it on the local level and creating those opportunities for yourself so that when you get that gig, you already have that. Especially because in film, the deadline is so quick, and the fact that you're trying to create the musical side of the director's vision means that it's a lot harder than like, I'm going to write music that I like. It's like, I need to write music that's right for the dramatic part of the scene on a short deadline for someone else. And so a lot of times that's why you just draw on all that experience and want to get as much of that as possible before.
That's awesome. And I really appreciate you guys saying you create your own opportunities. And that is something that I say all the time. And that's so great to, hear from like-minded musicians and business people. It's very encouraging. And I would definitely say that is very key to the business that we're in, because people are not going to be calling every day. Sometimes people don't call, there can be very dry seasons, there could be very fruitful seasons, but there can also be dry ones. And that's why it's so important to be proactive, look for opportunities. You guys have done an incredible job looking in places that maybe other people aren't. And that's really very smart of you guys, and awesome to see everything that you've done. And I live by that mantra: create your opportunities. Don't sit at home and wait for the phone to ring. Decide what you want to do and figure out a way to do it. And I think, some of our takeaways so far are create opportunities and just figure out a way to do it. Like you're saying, you don't have to have a job in order to get started. Just start. Just create. And, all of those hours are going to mean everything. When you do get that first job, you're ready. And I wanted to ask you guys, what are some things that you'd like to discuss on the business end? How does negotiating a contract for a movie, what does that process look like for you guys? Are you the ones negotiating that? And where does someone start if they're handed a contract to score a film?
Yeah, ultimately creating music is a business. As soon as you get paid, even if it's at the friend level, you're a business. Which sounds scary when you're thinking of doing something artistic, because usually being artistic and making money sound like they don't necessarily go together. But all in all, you gotta pay your bills. You gotta have money to buy equipment, feed the household. It's never comfortable talking about contracts, but you have to do it. One of the most, I kind of came up with this idea a couple years ago, where I'm just going to be open about how much I'm getting paid. So if I'm working with somebody, they will either tell me that they're getting paid 3 times as much and I need to ask for more money, or they're getting underpaid and then they're able to essentially ask for more money. So essentially what happens if you get a contract and you do not understand what it says, do not sign it. One of your friends out there is in law school or might even be a lawyer or deals in contracts in general. You could really hurt yourself by signing something and giving away. You potentially could be giving away rights to your music. So Patrick, if you can actually kind of talk about different ways in which you profit off of music, and then some of the different ways in which you need to protect yourself by not necessarily giving away the rights to those performances.
Sure. So there's kind of like I feel like it's almost, I don't know, there's good and bad contracts at every level. But there's certain ways of, the way I think of it, and the way actually my friend Scott Booker gave me this advice on negotiating contracts with this, is you want it to be a mutual investment. So you want it to be that they're investing in you being part of the team, but you're also investing your time and your talent in it. And so depending on what that investment looks like, depends on what sort of pay has to be happening. And so, for example, doing things on spec. So doing speculative work. So, I mean, Maggie knows what this means, but for people watching, that's just, I'm doing something for you for free with the idea that if you use it, you'll pay me something. So if I'm doing something on spec, what I'm saying is that I am gambling that the time I will spend working on this is worth the chance of it getting placed and me getting paid. And so that means that I will never do spec work that's exclusive. Like, I'm not going to be like, oh, I'm going to do this work for you for free, and then if you decide not to use it, you still own it, and then I just did all this work for free that never got used. It's like if there's some sort of exclusivity, they'll pay for that. And everyone we've worked with that's been upfront has always had that kind of thing of like, if they want the exclusive rights to that, they'll do something to pay that. So we've done ones where like they'll pay us, you know, even something as small as $200 or $500 for the right to decide to use it for the next year.
Usually that's like commercial work. A lot of times that happens with commercials, is they'll ask a group of people and they'll pay them for the rights to consider using that. That also goes along with, it might take them some amount of time to decide that you cannot use that music in something else because they potentially will use it. As soon as they say you're free, it's still your creation. You can.
And even if it's just the rights to be able to use it, what you're essentially doing is you're selling the ability to sell exclusive rights to someone else for the next year. And so all of those things kind of happen where you look at them, and usually if it feels bad, there's something fishy. And if it feels good, there's something good about it. And so for us, it's kind of a thing of, we've done all the different kinds of contract. We've done, you know, work for hire where we do the work, we get paid a lump sum, and then they own it. And we've also done work, so spec work, going kind of circling back to it, and I tend to tangent, so Christina will keep me on track.
I will try.
I don't mind doing spec work if I'm keeping all the rights to the music, because then it's an excuse for me to write music in a style I might not otherwise write. And so that's one of the things that I love about that stuff, is it's like, oh, okay, like, if this gets placed, great. If it doesn't get placed, then I've got all these pieces of music I wouldn't have written otherwise. And I can use them for other movies, and so...
Honestly, when we were starting out, and Patrick was just building his portfolio of little compositions that he wrote to potentially be used in film, he would just create a narrative in his head. It's like, this is an action scene.
Yeah.
This is a chase scene. This is a horror scene. And he would just compose.
Right. And so I view spec work as kind of like that. Like, it's a chance to have some cool creative constraints that will push you in a direction you wouldn't otherwise have. But then for other work, so a lot of times, and this is also my job at school, so I'm middle management. That's what being a director of a school is. You have people ahead of you who are upper management, and you have employees. And so we always view it as you're representing the people who are trusting you, so the people that you're hiring, and you're also talking to the people above you. You're kind of negotiating both ways to try and make sure the people are getting the deliverables that they need above you, and that everyone's taken care of and able to perform and get paid right below you. And so one of the things that Christina said, which I really love to me, is because I tend to bid too low. I tend to be like, I want to make art. Oh, whatever.
I'm like, I want to pay bills.
Right. And so one of the things Christina started saying to me is, are you willing to subsidize their project? And so if it's a project that I really believe in, that like I would do it for free, then a lot of times we'll give a rate, and we'll tell them that we're giving them the discount, but we'll do a rate because you don't want to only work, especially as your prices go up and up, you don't want to only work with people who can afford you, because that pigeonholes you into a certain artistic world as well. And so it's given us the ability to kind of say, hey, you know, we really believe in, like, you know, whether it's ethically, we believe in the story that you're telling, or we know what your budget is. And a lot of times with those things, it's being kind of having enough of a relationship that you have that talk of like, what is your budget?
I think that's actually something really important to know when you're bidding on projects or negotiating a contract, is knowing the overall budget. Say for a film, this is very low numbers, but if a film only had $1,000, right? And that includes everything, and you ask for $800, that's just not gonna happen, like, at all. And so I think just being able to be realistic within the budget, the scope of the project. $100 for a $1,000 project, absolutely. That's within reason.
And so a lot of times we'll have that conversation of, because we pay, you know, kind of the city rates for our musicians, we're not going to ask them to subsidize their rates for anything, because we're negotiating on their behalf. And so their rates stay the same. And so for things like that, we'll always be very upfront of like, cool, this is how much it is to do this. If you want X, you know, like if you want that full symphonic John Williams sound, you can't just hire a string quartet. You got to get at least this many players. And so we'll be like, this is how much that costs. And then it's up to them for that. And so we're kind of giving them those options.
Very cool. That's all very interesting. Thank you guys for expanding upon all of that. In my personal experience, I've definitely experienced a lot of similar situations from what you guys have just explained. And I can agree with you on the spec situation. Sometimes when you have a spec opportunity come up, you think, okay, is this worth trying to do this and knowing that it may not get used? And I've had a lot of things that we've done on spec get used for other things. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know if you guys have had that too, but it's definitely been eye-opening for me, because I would never have created that unless it was for that specific opportunity with those guidelines. Mm-hmm. And for example, we had an opportunity to pitch for a Disney Junior theme song for a new show. And so we wrote this theme song, and I think it was like a minute long. We worked on it with Mitch Bell, actually. And we've done a few more for them as well. But this one in particular, we did, and we felt like we nailed it. And you just never know how many people are pitching for this, what the politics are, what the situation is. But we didn't get it, and we were super bummed. But we decided, okay, yes, this is a theme song for a Disney show. The lyrics are obviously specific to this one show. Let's change them, use the track, keep the melody, and make a new song. They didn't pick it. We still own it. They didn't pay us, but now we have this 1-minute song. And it's been used probably 10 times on different TV shows. And it would have never existed if it weren't for that opportunity. So I have had that experience, and that's really cool that you guys have had similar experiences. So if you get an opportunity to create a song on spec, it can definitely be worth it if you can pitch it for other opportunities and keep it in your catalog. So very cool. And I've also had a lot of experiences with different contracts as well. And my number one advice is, if it doesn't feel right, definitely talk to an attorney, talk to someone you know. If it's something that you really want to try to make work, spend the time trying to figure it out, and don't feel like you have to rush into anything. I think that if anything ever feels super rushed to me, it's not really, like if someone's pressuring you into signing a contract, it's probably a red flag. Like, especially if you need the time to go over it and you'd like to talk to somebody about it, or you have questions. I think at any point in someone's career, that's respectable to have time to review an agreement. So that's something I would like to add as well. But yeah, if it doesn't feel good, definitely see that as a red flag for sure. Thank you guys for your input on the business end of stuff. In general, what do you think are some top do's and don'ts in communicating with people that are working in film productions? Are there things that you would suggest not to do, or or to do from your experience in just the simple communication with these people?
Why don't we kind of go back and forth? I'll say an idea and then you say idea. So I think first and foremost, you need to do your research. So when I'm talking to a director, obviously we are working together, but we're also building a relationship as friends. If you know somebody is really into a specific type of film, you can talk about that. If you know they're really into a specific type of film and then you say you hate it, They'll probably question your relationship together, your working together, because obviously you're not in the same, artistic level, I would say, or artistic mindset. Do you have advice for that?
Yeah, to kind of jump off of that, so in film, and this is something I work on as well, you want to listen. Because it's, as an artist, your music is an expression of yourself. It's all the things that you're feeling at that moment and you felt in the past. In film, you're trying to fulfill the space that the drama needs at that moment. You're trying to heighten, and a lot of times directors will talk in emotional language. So you're there to figure out what musical characteristics will convey that emotion. For the director, they'll be talking in emotional terms. And so your job is to really empathize with the director's vision. And so what Christina was saying about like doing your research, getting inside kind of the mind of the director and the genres that they're wanting, and really becoming sort of a super fan of the sounds that the director is hearing. So if they have temp tracks or reference tracks, that's a really great place to start. And then you can kind of build that musical rapport with them. You're kind of building a shared language. And so then they know when they want something, they can say, hey, that thing you did there. And then you have a word for that after that. So it's really building a vocabulary together.
Yeah, it's almost like you're translating what they're saying into music, and how and then hearing that, and I know it's a process, and we've had to go through that as well. It literally is like translation, taking descriptions from people who are not musically inclined. And I mean, not all the time, but sometimes different directors or producers don't have a musical background, and taking, you're right, their emotive descriptions and turning that into music somehow. That's an art in itself.
Mm-hmm. There's a really great example of that. We were working with a band out in LA some years ago. I think that album came out in like 13 or 14, something like that. And so to do it, this was with the Los Angeles New Music Ensemble. We went out to LA, and I just spent 2 weeks in this guy's bedroom studio, and we wrote all the arrangements together for the orchestral parts for their album. And maybe like 5 days in, we kept running to this thing where he kept saying, I want to sound major minor. And he had a pretty good, musical background. I was like, I want to sound kind of major minor. And I kept being like, well, do you want like a split third chord? I mean, that's major and minor. Do you want like, I kept trying different things of like, what do you mean when you're saying major? Like, what are you hearing? How can I find that? And finally it was like, oh, you want me, if the thing is in a major key, he wanted me to play kind of like a 1 major 7 chord, but not not like in root position, because then it was too 1-ish. It would be like kind of the 3 chord with like it was a very specific chord.
You figured it out.
And it took us like 4 days to find it. And once we found it, it was like the rest of the time he's like, do the major minor chord. And it's like, boom, there it is. All right, we got it. That's what you want for the orchestration there.
Wow.
And so that was like, we were finding that, and even in music theory, there's not a specific word that means like, not a root position 3 chord that's the opposite major or minor from what the key is in. There's not a word for that. And so we had to kind of find that.
Yeah, I would say along the lines of advice, when you're collaborating with people, especially on a film, I don't know, a good percentage of the stuff you write is going to get cut. And so actually not being too attached to something, or, it is, I mean, we're all artists, right? It is upsetting when somebody doesn't like something as much as you like it. Not showing that upset, like that you're upset to a level that it would be uncomfortable. And so, of course, you're allowed to end the day and then, hang out with your friends and complain about all the things that happened.
Like, they took away my note.
Yes,
that was
exactly.
The note.
But don't try and fight them on it. If they don't want it for a scene, they don't want it for a scene. It's often not personal, even though it really feels personal.
Yeah, it's like people who make it in art, it's almost like the big roadblock for so many people is that they can't take revisions.
Or just not revisions or critique at all.
Yeah, it's critique. It's like, we are professional people who can take critique. Like, that's what we do all day, every day. as a mix engineer, you send stuff and they're like, I don't like how this sounds. And it's like, there's always that response. And you have to remind yourself, they said they didn't like that one chord, and you're like, but that chord's so important. And you're like, there were like 90 other chords in the piece that they were fine with. They just want you to change that one chord. Just change the chord.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of revisions, I mean, yes, that is really important to know going into a lot of these projects, that there will be revisions. And yes, you can't be too precious about something to where when someone asks, can you change that? You can't let it hurt your feelings. It probably isn't, like you're saying, it's not a personal thing. They have a reason for that request, and they may even have liked it, but someone else said it needed to be different, So I think that's really important to note. Revisions. How many revisions is too many revisions for a project? Do you guys set a limit? Do you say
This is a good question.
What do you say?
Because we don't have a policy yet, and I think we're going to have to come up with the policy.
And it depends who it is, too. So a lot of times we're working with people that we already know. And so it also kind of depends on budget. So like one of the things that we really like on projects is when we can get paid enough that money isn't the issue. Like if you're paying us a rate that allows us to just be artistic partners, like there's no, call me at 11 p.m. or midnight and we'll work on it and get everything right. That if you're getting paid an amount that allows you to do that because you're not having to give up on other work, then that's a really great place to go with that. I have trouble setting revision deadlines, especially for like mixes and stuff. I like there to be a deadline, I guess is the thing. I prefer there to be a deadline than a revision number for mixes, because otherwise you can get into like kind of that revision hell of like, we just wrapped up a project that we recorded a year ago, and it was just COVID kind of slowed everything down, but the end product's great. And so I don't know if I would have been willing to...
He's saying this now. You're not saying this 2 weeks ago.
I know, and I'm doing like revision 11 on it.
I think some mix engineers will do some kind of limit, so they'll go, you get 2 or 3 revisions, and then after that the recall cost is whatever the recall cost is. Generally, Patrick and I, when we are bidding on a project, we just do an overall cost, and obviously if it's within reason, we don't ask for more money, but as soon as it gets out of that, then you might go like, oh, well, the studio, you spent 20 hours in the studio and only budgeted for 10. So obviously that's going to need to be made up. I think you need to create a system for yourself that makes it feel like your time is not getting taken advantage of, and whatever that means for you. It could be a set number. It could be a deadline. Regardless of how many edits there are, revisions, it needs to be done by December 1st or whatever your deadline happens to be.
Yeah, and it depends on the project and on the person, and it also like sometimes you kind of just have to eat it on that project and decide whether you want to do another project with that person. Like if you have a horrible experience, maybe, and I try not to view it as like, they made this a horrible experience. It's like, maybe I'm not the right artistic partner for this person.
No, I think it's, I don't think it's that. I mean, I've never been in a situation where the relationship didn't work out because you learn their language, you learn how to work together.
It's true, actually. We've been lucky in that, like...
Yeah,
And we're also willing to get past that hump with them. Like being open enough with them and, being clear about like kind of keeping that you want a great artistic product and everyone is trying to accomplish that. And so kind of keeping that in kind of like the sight line of like, we're all trying to make this work. Like, with the revisions, they're not saying that because they don't like you or your music's bad. They're saying that because they're trying to like make this movie as good as possible. And you're partners in that. Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, I think from our experience with mixes, just like what you're saying, Christina, 2 or 3, and then we have to discuss another rate as far as working with mix engineers who have mixed our albums. But yeah, from a recording process, perspective, like, we've done a lot of vocal work working on different projects, and we've learned that we have to set a limit for revisions. And also, I think it's important to note that it's good to live with a recording for a little while. Don't send your revisions right away, because you might actually be okay with something that you said you want to change, or you might have more things you want to change and should save it all for one email. I think that's really important too, because I think a lot of people may respond to that too quickly. And there's something about going with your gut instinct, but there's also something to be said for living with something for a longer period of time, which is hard to do when you're on a deadline, which is most of the time. But in an ideal world, it would be nice to have a little longer.
Always.
Yeah. Well, so if you guys were starting today, what are some things that you would want to know about how to make a living doing what you guys are doing now? Maybe some things you wish you would have known back then, or just some helpful tips to our viewers.
I would say if I was starting out today, knowing, especially when I was younger and very opinionated, that I'll be working with these same people 10 to 20 years later. Like people I was in high school with, we work with. And so I think it's just knowing, it could be the person the last person you think you would ever collaborate with is probably the person who might give you your first paying gig.
Wow. That's good advice.
Yeah, I've got this kind of like, it's not even pseudo-spiritual, so it's kind of like a mix of like karma plus like every gig is an audition for the next gig. And so I have this kind of thing that it's like every person you meet has a version of you that exists in their head, which is all of their experiences with you and everything they've heard about you and all of that stuff. And each time you do a project, they're getting new information of who they think you are and what they think you can do. And that's different for other people. So like people who knew you as a student will always have the student version of you somewhere in their head. And people who knew you only as a professional, you kind of appear as this sort of fully formed professional for them. And so I really try, and every artistic project is as good as I can do it. Because even if I might get better, even if I might get better in the future, one of the main things kind of like that I feel like I want them to define me as is someone who will give their all to the artistic project. And so it's a big thing of like, that's practicing being fully committed to artistic projects. And so the more you practice that, the easier it is. And so like I think for professionals, it can be dangerous to get kind of jaded and then the kind of like, oh, only give 80% on this project, and then like you kind of forget how to give 100% because you've gotten used to giving 80%. And so that's a big thing for us is it's like we've gotten so much great practice of like ripping our hearts out to try and make an artistic project successful that now it doesn't feel like ripping our hearts out anymore. You know, it's like, no, this is just how it feels. And we've learned the bits of like, oh, if I'm tearing my hair out and I don't want to do it, that means that there's only 10% left. You know, it's like, I know this is how I feel at this stage. So then it's like, oh, okay, that can give you the impetus to do that extra like 10 hours of work or 100 hours of work or whatever it is.
I would also say don't let your equipment hold you back. Like a lot of times I hear people saying like, oh, I can't make this recording because I need to buy this microphone or I need to buy this preamp or things like that. A good song's a good song. Good song recorded just straight on your iPhone, and it's catchy and people enjoy it, it's a good song. Also, I think relying on your friends and not trying to do it all yourself. I wish I would have known that early. I don't have to do everything. I don't have to get held up because I'm wanting to make a music video, but I don't know how to film something correctly or light something correctly. So I would say, I wish I would have collaborated when I was younger. More collaboration.
And just keeping your ego out of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, if you're all puffed up and you're trying to prove yourself, you're usually not listening. And so...
I would say listening, right?
Listening.
Listening.
I mean, one of the things that... especially when people are students, they usually have this thing of like, you know, they've had whoever their sensei is who've told them this is how you do it, so everyone else is wrong, and this is the way you do it. And I always approach it of like, I love it when someone does something differently from how I do it, because then I'm learning this is how you do it this way. You know, like, and once you get into aesthetics, there's not a right or wrong way. There's kind of like a minimum acceptable professional level, right? And so that's what you hopefully go to school to learn, or like you do an internship, you're learning like how to get it good enough that this could be picked up by a TV show. After that, it's just what people like, and it's cultural and it's personal, and so like learning other people's processes has been so huge, because then when you do want that result, you can go like, oh, okay, that's why they do it that way, because then you can get X.
I would say actually you do this really, really well. There are many ways, there are many roads, there are many streams to get to the same place. Just because you were taught to do it one way doesn't mean it's the only way. And so when we talk with people who do a lot of live sound, their philosophy on recording is extremely different than ours. We're not necessarily based in like live sound, but in like doing recordings more in the studio, or it could be like a live recording. And so it's like learning from their processes. Even if you wouldn't do it that way, it doesn't mean that it's wrong.
Yeah, I had a recent thing. I was reading a book by a bunch of Decca and EMI classical engineers, and it was like my recording philosophy, but said by people who've done it for 50 years, you know? And I was just like, oh, I found it. This is like, you know, and those are the recordings that I really love, but that doesn't mean that that's the only way to record. And so I get to talk with like post-production engineers, and they have a very specific way about recording. And people who do broadcast are usually like, you know, my job is to accurately capture what is happening. And it's their job to handle the music.
Whereas ours is like, let's record them and cover up all their mistakes.
Yeah, we're in a partnership to create
the best
sounding
possible.
performance.
Yeah. Right.
But neither is right or wrong. You know, and so it's cool when you get to meet those people and you see their miking technique, and you go like, oh, why do you have this like this? And they explain it, and you go like, oh, that totally makes sense. Like, that's not how I usually mic it, but it gets this different sound. And then you kind of can take that and put it in your pocket.
Yeah, that's so awesome. So definitely being well-rounded, I think, is very important. And hearing different perspectives from different people on the same topic is also really important. I can say from my experience growing up, I had, I think, 12 different piano teachers between the age of 5 and 18. As we know, musicians move a lot and switch jobs a lot sometimes. And so I just had a lot of teachers growing up. And I think that is really awesome, because I got to take the, you know, teachings of all these different people and pick up on all these different ideas and kind of create my own opinions based on all of these others from them. And I can really attest to that. Having so many different opinions on the same topic can be extremely helpful. So thank you guys for bringing that up. And is there anything else you guys want to say before we sign off today?
I think if you're interested in making music in any capacity, make music. Collaborate, have fun. Don't worry so much in the beginning about having to make money, but once again, creating an opportunity to work and collaborate.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's great. It's just, yeah, the world always needs more art.
Mm-hmm.
There's no like limit to, you know, there can only be this many artists in Oklahoma City, and then the market's saturated. It's like, it's totally a bigger pie, not a piece of the pie. situation.
Yeah, and I think this kind of goes back to one of our last questions. Is a great way to end is when somebody else gets an opportunity to obviously not be jealous, because you can't have a scene if you're the only one creating art. A scene means there are people everywhere in your city creating music and art.
Yes, that's a very important point to drive home for sure. And it's also important to know that everyone, has different skill sets, and maybe yours are not needed for that specific opportunity. And it's important to celebrate our fellow musicians and fellow creatives' accomplishments, because I think it's important to see it as an accomplishment for all of us, instead of, oh, I wish I could have gotten that opportunity. I think it's really important to celebrate each other's accomplishments, and thank you for talking about that. And on that note, congratulations, you guys, on everything that you've got going on and everything coming up. Thank you so much, Patrick and Christina, for being here with us today on the Searchlight Sessions. This video series is designed to help up-and-comers in the entertainment industry to expand ways they can be successful. Stay tuned for some takeaways from this session to assist with your success. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.